Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to start the mods on the Tamiya 1850L. By now the truck's had a good few hours of use and it's running really rather well. Super smooth and quiet. So rather than do anything with the mechanicals, we're going to deal with the appearance first. Under the chassis there's a couple of fuel tanks with the bottoms cut off and the holder for a 6L Nimi. We've already moved the battery to the box on the chassis, so we can happily replace everything under there with something that looks a bit neater. So I've been busy with the 3D printer again and printed out this lot. The fuel tanks sit towards the front of the gap and the blue bits fill the gap in front of the rear wheels. Now I've already painted all the bits, and if we look at the parts in SketchUp it should be a little bit clearer how they all go together. For the fuel tanks there's three parts. A left tank that has a cutout for running any wiring along the chassis, otherwise it's just a solid lump with a low density infill. The right hand tank also has a cutout that fits around the steering servo, also with a space for the servo arm. If you move the steering servo you could of course just mirror the left hand tank. The third little part are the mounts. They screw into the tanks with a single long M3 screw and a little bit of cyanoacrylate. Then using the two holes they mount to the chassis where the battery holder usually goes. All the bits can easily be printed without any extra supports, making them rather easy to make. The rearmost bits are a bit more complicated. This time we've got 6 different parts. Starting in the middle we've got the mounting bracket. Now it just sits under the chassis rails with the outside flanges just slightly proud of the outside of the chassis. The 2 green clamps then fit between the rails and clamp it in place. Unfortunately there aren't any holes in the chassis rails in useful places. We could have drilled holes, but that requires a bit of precision drilling, and if you're not careful you could make a real mess. Using the clamps means it's all completely reversible. The pink box is a set of drawers. Probably not exactly scale, but they won't be easy to see once they're fitted, and it looks a bit more interesting than just a big box door. It's a separate part from the base to make it easier to paint, so you don't need to worry about any masking. The 2 screws that attach it to the centre mounting bracket also clamp the bits together. On the other side we've got a twin storage box, which again attaches to the bracket with 2 screws. On the top there's an air tank. Now it's a single piece, which makes painting the slot in the middle a bit of a challenge, but it's going to be largely hidden under the box floor, so it doesn't matter too much if it's not perfect. It attaches to the storage box with a single screw that goes up through the bottom. And so it looks like the tanks actually go somewhere. There's a manifold that attaches with 2 more screws. If you use M3 cap heads, the heads fill the cutouts rather nicely, making it all look quite tidy. Now I was planning to make the outside surface curved to make them look a bit more like pipes, but I couldn't find a nice way to do it in SketchUp. I'm pretty sure it's possible though. All these bits will, assuming I remember, be up on Thingiverse with links in the description. They'll most likely go up as 2 things, one for the tanks and one for the storage, just so it's a little easier to know which bits are needed for where. Right. Before we can fit the new bits, we need to remove the stock parts. First we'll remove the fuel tank with the hole in the side for the MFC control panel. It's got 4 small self-tappers that need to come out so we can split it. Then inside there's 3 M3 screws that attach it to the chassis. Take them out and that's the tank removed. The battery tray has 4 M3x6s attaching it to the chassis. Now it's worth noting we're going to be reusing these screws to fit the new fuel tanks. Now of course you could replace them with some nice fresh M3x6s. Take the 4 screws out and the battery tray just lifts out with the half tanks. That just leaves the little widgets on the side rails that lock into the battery tray. They end up getting in the way of the new tank, so we need to remove them. They're just held on with a couple of small self-tappers. And there we go, one clean chassis. You can see the yellow and blue motor wires there now. That's why there's a cutout along one corner of the new tanks. There's plenty of clearance for whatever wiring you might want to fit. We're going to fit the rear parts first so we can slide them around on the chassis to make access a bit easier. The mounting bracket is symmetrical, so it doesn't matter which way around it goes. It just sits on the bottom of the chassis rails. To attach it we use the 2 clamps. Now they have tabs at one end that provide a gap that's just right to grip the chassis rail when the screws are tightened. It's a little bit fiddly, but they need to go under the bracket. Then 2 M3x6 screws go in from the top. Initially just take up the slack, but don't tighten them. For now we still want to be able to slide the whole lot up and down. For the next bit, it might be easier to remove the prop shaft, but if you've got a good screwdriver or ball-ended Allen key, you can get away with leaving it in place. We need to offer up the drawers to one side and thread in two fairly long M3 screws. Something like M3x20s will do, but it's not all that critical. For the storage boxes and air tanks, we need an M3x12 that goes up the bottom of the boxes and threads into the hole under the tanks. It's worth noting some of the holes might want a 3mm drill passing through them, and an M3 tap helps a lot too. But if you've done a bit of 3D printing, you'll probably have something that will do already. On the end of the tanks, we need to fit the manifold. Again, a couple of M3x12s will do. It's not critical. As long as a screw reaches, it'll be fine. Now, fitting this assembly is a bit fiddly. There's really not quite enough access to get a good line on the screw heads. Ball-ended Allen keys work, or you could just do them up a little bit at a time. When they're snug, the whole assembly does feel very solid, the idea being it should take some knocks without getting damaged. For now, we'll slide that lot right to the back of the chassis while we fit the fuel tanks. This one's a servo side tank, which has the cutouts to clear the servo. Now, I've painted all the inside bits black to hide it as much as possible. There's a single hole on the inside where we fit the mount with an M3x15 or M3x20. I did end up removing them again and applying a couple of drops of cyanoacrylate just to make sure that nothing moves. To attach to the chassis, we use a pair of M3x6s that thread into the holes in the chassis that had the battery tray. The mounts are extra chunky, so when the tanks are on, they'll put up with a lot of abuse. If you reach under the truck and pick it up, they support the weight quite happily. With both tanks fitted, we can slide the rear bit to set the position and nip up the screws. They're designed so it should all fit just inside the steel side rail stays. The idea being aftermarket stays and rails should still fit, although I've not tested that. And there we go, that's what it looks like now. I think it really finishes things up nicely. With the stock parts it looked a bit empty, and the low hanging battery holder really stood out. If you end up making a set, let me know, or better yet, share your make on Thingiverse so we can see some pictures. So that's going to be it for this week then. As always, thanks for watching. Like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a message down below, especially if I forget the Thingiverse links again. Bye guys!